Hi, everyone. Welcome back to my podcast. This is Steph's podcast, and this is episode 75 or 76. Got to double check on that. But we're getting up there close to 100 episodes, and I really want to thank every single one of you who are listening in every single week and are really taking advantage of all the information that we're providing each week. As you guys know, I'm very intentional with the people that I have on these podcast episodes. And today is no different. I have someone who, you guys will get to hear his story. And he is someone who has been impacted by the fires in LA. For those of you, I know you guys a lot are in LA and you guys listen to this episode. We're going to be diving into that topic and tying it into real estate and, believe it or not, tying it into ADUs as well, right? And how all of this can really be problem solving solutions for what people are currently experiencing and Drew himself. So I'm going to quickly read his bio, and you read the shorter version before I hand it off to him so we can get started. So I'm going to get right into it. And here it is. So, Drew, um, can you help me out with your middle name,
Oh,
last name here?
yes, it's McTigue. It's
Mick
Irish.
McTeague.
McTigue.
Okay.
McTigue.
McTeague. Okay.
McTigue.
Pedrick.
That's
Okay.
right, Pedrick.
Awesome. Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. Founder and chief visionary of MCTIGUE, began his career in New York, inspired by a family legacy in design and engineering, with a passion for creating sustainable spaces. Drew started as a lighting designer, then transitioned to architecture and construction, eventually leading teams and building strong client relationships. I love that. I'm all about relationships. It is a relationship business. In the early 90s, he launched two practices, one in architecture and the other in product design. Drew's career included leadership roles at prominent firms, notably spearheading the award winning LA Police Headquarters project. In 2011, he founded McTigue, focusing on conscious architecture, which is a very interesting topic that we'll get into. And I'm curious to hear more about that, tackling socially and environmentally impactful projects. I'll leave it at that because, as you guys can hear, he's just been very intentional with a lot of the work that he's done. And that's something I advocate for all the time. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Drew. Drew, thank you so much for being here. And thank you for, again, taking the time to do this podcast episode with me.
Thank you, Steph. This is really a wonderful opportunity to be on this podcast with you. Um, you and I have talked for some time now, and so I was very much looking forward to having this session with each other, regardless. But as you can see, my background today is not an office,
Yeah,
and
and,
as
and
Steph
before
alluded to,
I don't want to, I
go
didn't
ahead.
mean to cut you off, but I wanted to say this. So, Drew and I, we reached out, we connected on LinkedIn. We have alignment in our, in the space that we work in. I had no idea what he's about to share with you guys. And so when he came on the episode before we started recording, I said, "Oh my God, your backdrop is a lot better than my backdrop." And then he goes to tell me, you know what he's currently experiencing, and it was a perspective shift there, to say the least.
Yeah, it's hard to put it all into terms over the last 2 weeks. What's been going on, and I'll go back a little bit on my own backstory that leads up to why I'm doing what I'm doing today with a wonderful team of people, actually a global team of people, and doing what we call conscious work. But basically, so 2 weeks ago Tuesday, I was on a Zoom call with two people in different parts of the planet. The three of us were talking about global climate change when I got a call that said, from a family member that said, go to the front of the building and look outside. And so I looked out the front door and it's all smoke up on the hillside. So we ended that call. I packed everything up that we could, put it in cars, and had to evacuate. So I lived in the Pacific Palisades. Um, Over the course of 24 hours, getting into a hotel, getting out of there with all sorts of other people from the Palisades, we learned that we had lost everything. and our entire neighborhood lost everything. I was able to get back in on Wednesday, 24 hours after the fire, by renting a bicycle, taking as far as the e-bike would let me before it stopped, walking along the ocean, and then hitching a ride on the back of a motorcycle. Someone who was volunteering who came up to me and said, "Where do you want to go?" And so he took me up the hill to Mescal Canyon Road, goes up the bluffs to where we live in the Palisades, and took me to where my car, one of our cars was, the home was, where the office was, and Steph, everything was ashes. I mean, everything around us was gone. It was uh, you almost couldn't tell where you were, even if you looked at the street signs, because nothing was familiar
Right.
at all. So anyway, we've lost everything, and thousands of other people have lost as well. So we're in the rebuilding world for sure for ourselves, but
Have you
McTeague
been
in the
able,
practice, yeah.
have you been able to process everything? Because I'm sure it, I was telling you offline, I just can't even picture that amount of acreage and the communities and the thousands of homes just being burnt down. I mean, that experience alone is going to be very traumatic and has been traumatic for a lot of people. And you seem to be very level-headed, even though you've
Mm,
really just lost everything, and not just,
yeah,
personal, but your business as well, right?
right.
Your office space. That, I don't know, that have you like actually come to
Oh no, I
terms
haven't processed all this at all yet.
with?
But I mean, I
Because
processed as much as I could.
from the time that your family member called you and said, "Look out the window or get out, there's a fire coming." How much time did you have to like grab whatever it is that you needed, and what was priority, and how quickly did you have to get out? Because I've heard,
Well,
just
yeah.
seeing that, videos, that it was very quick.
Yeah, it was an hour roughly that I had, and that involved, things at the office, things at home, trying to decide what to take. In hindsight, of course, looking back, there were other things I could have done, other things we could have taken. You know, it's easy to look back and regret something that we, could have, should have. But that's true for pretty much everybody. I don't think there's anybody that could say, "Yeah, we actually have done this before, and we know exactly what to do, and we're just gonna, pull this stuff out of storage and rebuild." Everybody has lost something, and
Right.
you can't help it. You can't help but just go, "Okay, well, we have to move forward, and we have to figure out where we're going to stay short term, how life goes on." Thankfully, my business is entirely digitized and up in the cloud. And our people
Right.
are in Los Angeles, Mexico, Argentina, Idaho, London. We're very fortunate to be kind of all over the planet. So we didn't lose a beat, honestly, other than the founder here
Right.
lost
Other
lost
than,
his office.
your housing and your office space.
And how,
I think
that's
that's
right.
that's that's one way to look at it, right? It's always perspective when you go through experiences like the one you're currently going through. It's how you look at things, right? And I think the fact that your business wasn't impacted gives you some hope, because you know that that's something you can lean into right now in these times. And it's just another day at the office with a different backdrop, but you have hope that eventually you'll get back on your feet and you can rebuild, hopefully, that same community. And now that's something that we're also going to talk about, right? Is what is it going to take to really get to that point, and how
Hmm.
realistically would we be able to rebuild? And with your
Yeah.
background, in architecture, one of the questions I had here was, you define your firm, specialty as conscious architecture.
Hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that, and what does that mean to you? How, it informs your vision when approaching a new project, and why it's important for you to design it this way.
Great. Well, I've been working for 40, now it's 44 years in architecture, and as you said a little bit in the beginning, in lighting design. Um, and all of our work is essentially sustainable to some degree or other, and sustainable, environmental, resilient, and all of this, all the terms that we used in terms of how we actually design better and healthier. But over the last 5, 10 years for McTeague, we began to realize that all the credentialing that you can do for a project, LEED certification, well building, living building challenge, all these things that are out there are dealing with a piece here and a piece there. And we felt there needed to be something that looked at the whole of it and said, how are we doing things that really benefit people, benefit the places we live, community, and benefit the planet? So we focus, and what we call conscious architecture is a focus on people, place, and planet. And we
Mm,
actually, in some ways, we put planet first, because if we don't have a planet that's healthy, we don't
right.
have any health. So we're very concerned about how we designed, the materials we use, where they're coming from, and how they get reused, the whole cycle, not just, we're very tired of, we've done many projects over the years, and we're tired of some of those projects where they were built, they lived a life of 5 years or so, or 10 years or whatever, and then they're demolished. When
Mm,
we do interiors projects, which we do quite a lot of, some of those, they last a 5-year term, and then everything inside that space gets put in the dump. And so we don't want to do that anymore. And that's a lot of what we're focusing on in terms of, for instance, today, it's an aside, but we're doing modular interiors where our clients are the landlords. And so they'll invest in that modular office, knowing that 5 years later, they can completely reconfigure it. And
right.
as we've been doing that, we were finding that the housing work that we were doing, and particularly the opportunities to do tiny homes, could benefit from that same idea. So about a year and a half ago, we started working with some communities in Boise, Idaho, to help them rebuild in a better way modular homes for the what we call the missing middle, right? The people who,
Right.
you know,
Right.
can't afford to buy a $5 million house or a $2 million house.
Mhm.
And so we created a series of modular homes, anywhere from 300 square feet to 1,500 or 2,000 square feet, most of them around 600 square feet. And these use modular panels with magnesium cement boards, which happen current to today. They're fire resistant panels, they're highly energy saving, and they're easy and quick to build. So we were doing that a year ago, thinking that this was a marketplace for people who couldn't afford to buy a house that normally,
Mhm.
that normally you can't, and only a few people can. Now we're realizing, this is one of the strategies for a rebuild, is to rebuild the whole house, or particular to our conversation, to get the planning process going, your permitting process going, but place an ADU on that site. You know, clean your land like everybody else has to do, and get
Right.
on your property. And so you can start to rebuild your lives. If we can do that, if I can do that and others can do that, then we have a neighborhood. And if the neighborhood's intact, then we have families in the street walking their dogs, seeing each other in the evening. We have shops opening back up again. And so we recreate the places that we live. And that's what's considered for us, is it's not about one person or one house. It's the whole place.
Yeah, it's the entire community. I love that. I love that, you guys take into consideration the planet first, because it's true. I mean, without being conscious of, how we're impacting the earth first, then,
Yeah.
the other two are irrelevant. And many times, these natural disasters that have happened, especially with the LA fires, we've all been keeping updated. If you're in LA or Orange County, it has consumed our world, right? Not just those who are experiencing it, but us on the sidelines looking at how we can help. I mean, it's been crazy to see just the amount of support and the community that really has come together to help one another, and really look at different solutions on how we're going to help get there. And so one of the things that I will talk about, because I'm actually going to be one of the instructors for the ADU Academy in San Diego, and I'm also
Great.
going to be at Tiny Fest. And one of the main
Great.
topics that we're going to talk about is, a lot of people don't know that these modular homes or SIP panels or tiny homes on wheels, you can actually convert into an ADU by doing the
Hmm.
proper permitting. And so I agree with you 100%. I think for the last 2 years, these modular homes and SIP panels were more targeted for people who couldn't afford the traditional stick build. But now we're
Hmm.
noticing, like, this isn't just for people who can't afford it. This is actually the way to go, to really make these housing solutions affordable, but then also taking into consideration the effects for long-term use, right? And
Yes.
making them fire resistant. I mean, there's so many benefits to it too. And it cuts your building time frame in half, right? Because now you can build
Right.
these these 600 square foot ADUs and like assemble them in 2 to 3 hours or a couple hours versus months, right? And I think, that saves you time and money. And that's one way to really restructure a lot of these communities, which leads me into, the second question, because we're currently recording this as the, devastating fires have hit LA, and you've also been, part of that. So thinking about not only how are we going to rebuild, but how can we rebuild as responsibly as possible? That's very important to consider. And it seems that you kind of mastered that approach. But what are you going to do, right, moving forward? And how will you help rebuild the Pacific Palisades? What do you think we should be doing to really incorporate that and implement it?
Well, there's layers to it. There's layers to the whole process of doing this. As a sort of speaking to, let's say, one particular homeowner or another, um, you've got land right now that's covered with debris, right?
Yes,
And you can't even get on it. And if you could get on it, you wouldn't want to be there long because it's toxic. Everything that we build with these days, it's actually toxic. It's just that it's inside the walls, or it's inside the flooring, or it's inside the laminate of something, right? So now that's all ashes. So the first part of the process is to get that all cleared away. And we helped people after the Woolsey fire 5 years ago, and very similar process, of course. We went to one site. It was about this very same time of the year, and I stood on my client's property, and everything around was blackened, except for down their hill were 5 or 6 orange trees. On this side, the oranges were still hanging. On the other side, where the fire came up, they were completely charred. That site had to get cleared, and over the course of a month, city, working with the state, working with the Army Corps of Engineers and others, cleared the land. So they got the debris off. That's what we're going to face now. The second layer to that is you have to take the soil, maybe
right,
a foot of soil, and remove all of that from your property, because all that stuff, all that terrible stuff, has absorbed into the land. So get rid of the debris, get the soil off. Now you can start to rebuild. You may have foundations that are still there. Those foundations has to be checked by structural engineer, and the soil by a geotech engineer. So all of this process to get there is going to take time. But what
right,
we did before for the Woolsey fire, and it's going to be so true here, is start your planning. Start to think about, do you want to rebuild that very same house or building? Do you want to You may be able to add a little bit more square footage and still go through the expedited process. They'll generally allow 10% more. You may be able to improve it a little bit because maybe it's a 50-year-old house, and
right,
you may find, okay, I wouldn't do it that way today. That's okay. You can do that. But work through the process with a team that knows how to do it. You really need to be working with the right people who either have done this before or are really plugged into the agencies and the other experts out there. Because otherwise, you can go down the road and find that you hired somebody to clear the land and they didn't have the proper certification.
right.
So be very, we want people to be very watchful of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's
But at the same time,
definitely they have to vet, and it's good because a lot of people don't understand the process, right? So I think if
yeah,
people just listening to this, they understand, as you're mentioning, there's certain layers to this, and there's different things that you're having to do at once. One of them is making sure you figure out how do you want to rebuild, submit that while you're cleaning everything else up, and while
yes.
at the same time you're figuring out your financial situation. So I'm curious to know, like, how with the previous fire where you guys helped, how did you guys handle, insurance claims and financial, options for these people who did want to rebuild, and what was like the time frame and the sequence of that?
Well, it was well. First of all, there were a lot of tears. Just to sort of share the personal side of this, we would have meetings with our clients, um, and we would immediately come to moments where one or the other, husband and wife, one or both, would just think about something, and a flood of tears would come. So
Right.
there's a real caring that needs to go into however we approach this, because it's a very tough time. Um, we helped by doing what we do as architects, right? We're skilled and we're experienced in coordinating with other consultants, collaborating, figuring out process steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, figuring those out. And what we found with the Woolsey fire was we all collectively thought the process was this, but as time went along, and working with Malibu in that particular case,
Mm-hmm.
that we'd find that there's a little divergent pathway here. It's not actually to go that way. It's actually going to need to do this also. So it was sort of a windy path to actually go through that process. But we stayed aware. We stayed very close with the agencies. So we were constantly meeting with the various departments. They were terrific, and I think LA would do this too, where they were appointing, a single point of contact.
Mm-hmm.
So they would help us to say, you need to go see geotech department for this. You need to go see planning for that. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's part of the helpfulness so stay close with the agencies. That's what we did. And that's what we recommend. Working with the insurance companies, the first thing that we had to do was identify the actual house that was on that site. And people think, well, we're going to just rebuild our house. Yes, but you have to show what that house was so you can say, was that a 3,000-foot house or a 5,000 square foot house? How many
Mm.
bedrooms did it have? What was the layout? How tall was it? All of those things. So we ended up having to draw their old house. And you can imagine, for people who lost their home, to show them 3D drawings, because we work in 3D drawings of their house on that site, that was also very tearful. But we had to draw that to say, okay, that's what you had. We can validate that to the insurance company. And so it's this square footage, has these amenities, these features, now establish the value. So we were working with them early on to help do that. Once they had their insurance, uh, once they had their claim settled, right, and they knew how much money they had, then we worked with them to say, okay, what can you really rebuild? Because that's another
Right.
layer. You may
Exactly.
get whatever people are going to get today. Many people are going to find it's not enough.
It's not
So,
going to
right,
be
so you're
enough.
going to say,
Mm-hmm.
maybe we can't build 4,000 square feet. Maybe we need to do 2,700 square feet. That may fit into our budget. So I
Right.
think we're going to go through that issue as well. And ultimately with Malibu, that's what we did. We went through a process. Malibu took a long time, and I'm not going to say this is what LA would take, but it was a few years. And so that's, enormously challenging to people. So my point of that is be patient, but keep the pressure on. Be
Right.
aware it's going to take time. Take a breath, understand. Don't think you're going to be back on the property, living there in 6 months.
No,
It's going to take
that's
time.
very realistic. I think for a lot of people, and if even a year, to be quite honest, like even for the people who can rebuild faster or figure out a more sustainable way to rebuild, your neighbors on each side and across the street and down that same street are probably not in the same financial situation as you, or they're still trying to figure out what they want to do. So you have to be, like you said, very sensitive about the topic, because people are obviously traumatized by what's happened. And I myself am actively, like I told you offline, I'm trying to figure out how can I offer my services, but be in a very mindful way, where I'm not sort of on them, too much. And I'm trying to figure out what's the
Yeah.
best avenue for them. So I would say to people who have currently experienced, the fires, is I'm just telling people, find housing for the next 3 to 9 months until you figure out
Hmm.
what is the insurance claim process going to look like, and then you're, figuring out what that funding will look like. Then now you can build based on that funding, which is basically what you're saying, right? Is once you know
Exactly.
how much you're going to be able to finance, then you build based on that. And that's
And then,
probably going to be your best bet. Now, of course, the whole process is going to be, you know, it's going to be pretty lengthy, but you
mhm.
have to just be mindful of that, be patient, and reach out to professionals, right? People can reach out to you, especially because you're going through it yourself right now. Like, what are your plans? Are you thinking of rebuilding, or are you considering selling your land and moving elsewhere? What are your goals?
Well, the office, of course, was in a building where we rented, so we understand at the moment that that's going to get rebuilt. Um, but that office, which was lovely stuff, by the way, which looked right out of the
Imagine.
Pacific Ocean,
Uh,
it was a great place to be, frankly, for 7 years. But because it looked out at the ocean, it was right at the
right.
edge of the bluff, and that location and some like that may not be able to get rebuilt the same way. So
I've
we
heard
we
that a
will
lot too.
rebuild.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll rebuild. But the other thing I want to say is, in terms of that process, and as you mentioned, you know, getting through the insurance claim, dealing with what funding you actually have in place, and then moving forward on that basis. I think there's either a one, two, or three phase approach to take. And I think thinking of this in terms of phases, like you said, like, where do I live for 3, 6, 9 months? Where do I live for longer while the house is getting
Right.
rebuilt? But what do I put on the land? And so the land could be at first, LA is very supportive of ADUs, so it could be that the right answer for this is to put an ADU on the property, which would be part of your long-term. The whole design for your
Hmm.
site could be like ADU, main house, but it also could be that your main house, you may say, well, I had 4 bedrooms and these other, other spaces, but we may be looking at designing homes where even the house itself has a phase two, so that you can build what you really needed essentially, and then down the road in time, you may say, okay, well, you know what? I can live with that. I'm on the property. I have an ADU. And 5 years from now, the plan will be to finish the property. It could be that that's a scenario for people who just simply need to get their lives back in order, and be working for a while, and save or be prepared, to finance the rest of the project later. So
That's a
that's a
that's a
strategy
great
too.
point. That's a great strategy, and you can use some of these manufactured homes, or these SIP panels to help you get there. And I agree. Then now you don't have to worry about where you're going to live for the next year or so. You may have to right now, but at least
Right.
know that ADUs have a pretty streamlined process all across the board,
Mhm.
except for when you have to deal with coastal commission, which is a whole other
Yes.
story. All right. So unless you're in coastal commission, in that area, then good luck to you. We hope for the best. And as you said, a lot of these people may not even be able to rebuild. So yeah, it'll be different scenarios for everybody. But
We're very hopeful, Steph. We're very hopeful that LA will be able to work with Coastal, and if not,
yes.
lead the process so that there's one-stop shopping. And that's what Malibu was able to do. Malibu actually said to everybody right away, we'll expedite the whole process. And what truly came out of that was that Malibu could self certify the coastal permits. So
Mm,
people didn't have to then go separately to coastal, back and forth and wait time. At the same time, they're trying to work with the city, and we're hoping that LA will be able to do the same thing. Obviously, you might have seen that the governor has talked about CEQA and the
right.
Environmental Quality Act, and getting relief there. So there's some things that will help, but we're going to find that departments like the fire department, we talked before the
Hmm.
podcast started, the fire department, they're going to look very closely. Um, Planning is going to look very closely at where are your fuel sources, what we would otherwise call the trees and plants on your property, like behind me. This is fuel. in a fire. And so where does that get located? How much is on the site? And what kinds of plants? So be sure to hire a landscape designer, a landscape architect, an arborist, or someone who can actually help you with the plant selections so you can get through that process faster. Otherwise, comments will be coming back and forth with the agencies as you try to develop your approvals.
Yeah, and everything we've talked about is obviously just more added expenses too, right? Unfortunately, but like removing the debris, having to,
Yeah.
remove the soil and having to look at the landscape overview of it. All of these things just are going to add more to your costs, which is another reason why you'd want to go for some of these smaller models, these tiny home living situations to kind of put the Band-Aid on it for right now, in
Oh
today's
yeah.
time. Yeah, I agree
Yeah.
with you.
Good point. Stuff is when we were doing these tiny homes last year, we were asked to constrain ourselves to the width and length of a pretty standard trailer home, mobile home,
Hmm.
and that's 14 feet wide by 44 feet long.
Okay.
We actually designed it. We actually designed a chassis. I'm very proud to say we actually figured out how to design a chassis with our engineers that has 7 axles to carry this whole thing down the road. But what we knew we were limited by became also the opportunity, because if we
Right.
could drive that thing down the road, we knew what the maximum heights were on the road. So the footprint was constrained to 600 or so square feet, but some of the units we did were 12-foot ceiling heights inside with glass here and skylights there and other glass in the back. So you can
That's one of
create
our
something
most
that's
that's one of
Mhm.
our most popular models, these 600 square foot ADUs with 10 to 12-foot ceilings, capped-in windows. It's those little things, right, that really make a huge difference. And honestly, at even 10 feet already feels a lot
Oh
more
yeah.
spacious than 8 feet. I
Yes.
think the standard should be 10 feet for a lot of these, 4 to 600 square foot models, because that's typically what people are building. Even if we take manufactured and SIP panels out of the equation, if you look at the data, because I do this all the time, most people come to me
Hmm.
and say, hey, Steph, I want to build an ADU. What is my ADU going to be worth after I build it, right? Or what is my property
Yeah.
going to be after?
Yes.
So I've kind of looked at all the data, and most of the ADUs being built in LA and Orange County are, number one, garage conversions, because it's
Yeah.
the most cost effective way. And most garages are 20 by 20, so they're 400 square feet. And sometimes they extend to the garage, or they'll go up to 600 square feet because
Hmm.
of financing, and because
Yeah.
anything under 750 square feet, you avoid impact fees, you avoid school fees. So there's a lot of benefits into tiny home living. There's a lot of incentives
Yes.
to keep it under 750 square feet. So yeah, to your point, I mean, that's the best strategy right now, I think, for people out there who don't really know what to do. I think
Hmm.
consider all of these options, and there's going to be several moving pieces while you figure out what your long-term plan can be. Because for those people, unfortunately, who can't rebuild, they may want to explore the option of selling their land and then buying elsewhere. But when you buy, think, be conscious, since you really
Yeah.
like to throw that word around. Let's be conscious about where we're buying and how we're going to rebuild and possibly build some ADUs on that new purchase, right? And I think, I wanted to hear from you. I know we had a few other questions, but I'm curious to know, like, from
Hmm.
your background and your expertise, how do you think would be the best way to rebuild in the Pacific Palisades? Because from what I'm learning too, right, from these fires is we've been in a drought for a certain amount of time, and we haven't had a whole
Yes.
lot of rain. And you talked about climate change. This
Hmm.
climate change situation isn't going anywhere, right? This is something we have to
Yeah.
keep facing. And so these Santa Ana winds they're not going anywhere. They're going to keep
No.
coming. And so what are we doing to move forward? Because it's very easy to say, sure, let's rebuild. But if we're not conscious and intentional about how we build, then we're going to be back at square one next fire and
Yes.
next drought, right? And we're going to start seeing them a lot more often. Same with hurricanes, same with just, you know more about climate change than I do, but from what I'm seeing, I'm like, okay, it sounds great to rebuild, but how are we going to do it? What's the best way to do it so that you don't come across these situations, or at least prevent it as much as possible by having some, I
Yeah.
don't know, fire resistant walls to begin with? I mean, I
Well,
don't know.
yeah, absolutely. The first thing that we like to think about in terms of this kind of situation, and we've dealt with hurricanes, we've dealt with Caribbean islands where
Mm,
everyone was swept off the island the first time in 350 years, and how do you rebuild there? So we unfortunately have some experience in this. Um, what we think of is in terms of resilience, that our homes, our businesses, where we live, work, and play, right, has to be able to manage these kinds of occasions, maybe once in our lifetime, but maybe more than once in our lifetime. So resilience is a big piece of that, and that using passive home techniques or passive house techniques is a big answer for residential. So the materials we use, things like after Woolsey and Malibu, the house we did there had no eaves, nothing projected
mm,
outboard of that house. The the lovely balcony that they had on the back of the house, which looked out at the Pacific Ocean, which used to be open underneath, it's not open underneath, right? It's like nothing, no embers could fly and get caught up inside, right?
mm,
And so the design creates more of an envelope. It's a little more sealed, kind of hermetic envelope. But houses should open to the air, especially here in Southern California. So being able to open and close the house to deal with weather conditions, to deal with the
mm.
winds, you name it, right? So we're talking about a very tight, very simple, clean kind of style that I think we're gonna see a lot more of now, as opposed to the modern farmhouse style, which has been popular for the last 10 years, what people call Cape Cod houses.
Mhm.
All of this they're lovely and they're historic and they remind us of our grandparents' home somewhere, but we
But that
can't build
doesn't
that
work
way
now.
today.
Yeah,
We
that
can't
doesn't work.
build that same way. No. But the good side is we all live differently today too. So
Right.
we're encouraging people to be creative, to be inspired. I mean, this is tragic, but in terms of coming out of this, is to not lose sight of your heart and the inspiration you have and the reason you came to this place in the first place, right? Why live in the Pacific Palisades? Well,
Mhm.
everybody's gone, but people are going to come back because they love that place. So our lifestyles in our homes are different. So recognize that, do more of an open plan. Put the kitchen and living and
That's a good
dining
way to
in a
start it.
right
Yeah.
in a way that is lovely and works for you. Create the things that are important, but also be open to the idea that we can live in a different way today. And then, make sure make sure that you're using materials where you may want to actually have not just a safe in your house if you have valuables that you want to store, but you might really need to have a safe room. And so
Exactly.
we need to think about that. Our local Bank of America, which had all sorts of safe deposit boxes, at first it seemed like that was fine. And at some point you were able to go back. Now we're hearing that that may not be the case. So if a bank's vault can't keep these things safe, then what will? Well,
Exactly.
well, there are ways. There are ways, and your own home could have a little spot. Maybe it's a closet, but in reality, it's made with concrete walls, or we're talking about cement, fiber cement board for
Okay.
exterior. So
Mm.
fiber cement board is a good exterior. It's fire resistant. The magnesium cement board as well. So there are materials that we can use, and there are methods that we can use to rebuild that that with all this in mind will last much better.
I agree.
There's a picture. Mhm. I
I
don't
was
know if you've
talking
seen the
to
picture. There's a
with
picture of a house in the Palisades that there's no house on the left, no house on the right, but this house is standing.
that one house. Yes, yes, I've seen that. Uh-huh.
Okay, that house was built using passive house resilient methods and materials.
Mm. See, when I saw that clip, I was like, that's the way to go, right? That's the new way to build. And I love that you have this really good perspective over everything that's happening right now, because it's true, right? Like, okay, yes, we're experiencing this tragedy, but how can we turn this tragedy into a passion project and build better and take into consideration how we live now, which,
Mhm.
how we lived and how we built back then isn't really going with how we're living and how climate change is changing now and how quickly it's changing.
Yes.
Like, some of these hurricanes are coming in faster than they were before and more consistently, and
Yes.
fires will too. And so, how can we just hedge against all of that by building more consciously? But yeah, I mean, just looking at different methods that work in today's world and how, that's why it's important for people to connect with somebody like you who really understands these conscious decisions that you should be making when wanting to rebuild, if that's something that we're going to, that you're going to do.
Yeah.
So,
Well, there are a lot of resources out there, and
yes.
we're actually about to modify we're about finished with modifying our website to be able to help people, bring
Hmm.
people to know how we might help them, but
Right.
also the other team members that are out there, people they can call directly. We're not trying to own the process, but what resources, what help is there. We're of course ready, and we have a lot of resources to do a lot of work, but be careful with the resources too that are being posted right now, because they're going
Yes.
to change, right? What When we see something from FEMA, and then 2 days later we see something else from FEMA, or from LA211.org, or the U.S. Green Building Council. I'm a member of USGBC. I'm also a member of the LA Business Council. Everybody is reporting. So my point is, keep going to them, because it's the knowledge is going to shift and change. And so
That's
it's an
very
evolving
important.
process.
You have to stay active. I actually need to do that myself. I'm a member of the Casita Coalition. So we recently had a webinar talking about exactly that, is the resources will continue to change. Also just the price gouging that you have to be careful with, right? A lot of these rents are
Right.
going out the roof. Just staying up to date, staying informed, right? Because knowledge will give you
Yeah.
that power and that confidence to kind of figure out what it is that you want to do in these times. So yeah, I mean, this is incredible that I've had you on this podcast and you're currently going through this and you're here to kind of give us some hope, and so much knowledge. So how can people connect with you? What's your website? How can they consult with you if they're thinking of rebuilding or just want to consult with someone who obviously can relate to what they're going through?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. We The first thing to do really is that our website is www.mctiguearchitects.com. And I know that takes some spelling to do. So if you
I'm
could
going to
post
put it
that,
on the
that's
chat. So,
fantastic. Yeah, that's great. So in the coming days, we'll be doing these pop-ups on the website, and there'll be a set of discussion points about the process, and our current thinking about what that process looks like, who the other team members are that we are working with and will be working with, and then the city, state, and federal resources that are
mm,
available. So, and just a note separately, but I'm on the American Institute of Architects Los Angeles chapter task force for the fire rebuild. So that'll also filter into our website. But I would look at organizations like AIA, LA.org, because they're posting things. I would look at the American Society of Landscape Architects, ASLA. The civil engineers, look at all of the professional websites that are out there for our organizations. Um, Look at them all. Um, Definitely go to la211.org. There's good information there. And we'll keep posting. We'll keep posting more.
yeah, I'll keep
It's a lot to.
I'll keep checking your website to stay updated. And I know you and I will collaborate in some way, shape, or form. I work with ADU West Coast. We're based out of Seal
Mhm.
Beach. So if you work on the architectural side, we'd be more than happy to work on the build side of things. And
Yeah.
management. I also help clients not only buy and build, but also management. There's a lot that goes
Mm.
into managing a tenant, managing the
Oh yeah.
property, managing the entire asset as a whole. So I see us, collaborating, working together to really help rebuild some of these communities and yeah, and just keep helping one another. And hopefully we should probably have you back on this podcast once you rebuild so you can
I,
share your story and your
that
experience.
would be great. That would be great.
Awesome.
Steph, I know we're maybe getting near the end, but of our time, but just to note a little bit, you know, LA and really the so many parts of the US had an incredible housing crisis before all this happened, right?
Right, right.
We haven't forgotten that while we're talking about thousands of people who need to rebuild their house, we had a housing crisis already. And so the
Already.
concept,
Yes.
right, of creating ADUs was already at the top of the list of
Now even
importance. Like we
more.
have to do that. And
Right.
now even more so. And so we're not stopping our other work. We're doing housing projects right now that come from the state's requirement for every community to have a housing element component in their zoning code, so
Right.
that sites that used to be non-residential or not mixed use now can be. So we're continuing that work, and there's a lot of work to do. People who were homeless 2 weeks ago, they're still homeless.
Right.
Um, so it's multi-pronged. There's a lot going on. And, I also think people should stay with their community. For our community, there are group chats. There's a lot of that, communication going on.
Mhm.
If you've
Mhm.
got that, or if you know about it where you lived, go, don't hesitate. Join in and follow the information so that you can stay in touch there. Chambers of commerce, community associations in your town, in your neighborhood, follow those things because it's
Right.
it's going to be hard to get through this. And so the more ability we have to work with each other, the better.
I think
And we will get
collectively
through.
we'll be able to lift each other up and help each other out through these times. And if you don't have a community, you can always reach out to us. I know I'm staying
Yeah.
updated as much as I can, and you're actively there, so you're doing the same. And so you guys can always reach out to us. We didn't even get to touch a lot on multifamily, but
Mm.
we definitely going to have you back on the podcast because there's so much that we didn't get to talk about. But it'll be a good
Mm.
recap, to see where things are maybe 6 months from now, maybe a year from now. With multifamily, to your point, I mean, what happened with the LA fires happened in one of the most dense areas. We're
Mm.
already behind on the amount of housing that we need. Now, with all these people being displaced in one of the most dense areas, it's only going to get
Yeah.
crazy. And the demand
Yes.
for ADUs is going to skyrocket, which means the higher the demand, the higher the cost, right? So I'm also
Yes.
expecting and anticipating that the cost of everything's going to go up. Plans, permits, build, and all these other site inspections, right? And then with multifamily, I think there's such a huge opportunity with repurposing space. That's like the easiest way that I
Yes.
think we can provide housing is by repurposing what's not being used. I mean, there's so many people that, luckily, like you're one of them, right? And I'm one of them. We were able to
Hmm.
work from home or work from anywhere because our business is digital, right? And so
Yes.
with that, I mean, a lot of these vacant office spaces can be converted
Hmm.
and create immediate
Hmm.
housing. But it really takes like people in the city to be involved, people with this at the state level to really help these hyper local cities implement all of this, and then have people like you and I who are advocating for it and are very involved to really come together and make it happen. That's the only way I
You're
see it.
absolutely right, Stefan. It's such a great and valuable point to talk about. The looking at what we have, and it's a little bit like the glass half full analogy,
Mhm.
right? It's like
Right, right.
what we have, what can we do with that? How can we change it? And we were doing studies and concept work for office to housing conversions,
Hmm.
and we were finding it was very challenging because of permits,
Yes,
because of the
because of the
engineering
permits.
involved and all that. And I think to that point of innovation, which is going to come out of this, a lot of innovation, we're going to find that people are going to figure out, and we hope to be a part of that, how to do
Right.
those
Right.
conversions in a more cost-effective, more efficient way, new technologies, new ways to do it. And it may be transitional too. People may live there for 3 years while they're be able to, build their house again and get back on the site. Um, let's not forget too that the downtown little village of Pacific Palisades also burnt down. So all those shop owners, and most of those shop owners were individuals who lived in or near the Palisades, and they had
Right.
those shops sometimes for 50 years. They're gone. So we have a lot. There's all that rebuilding to do too.
Yeah, I agree. And it's going to take some time, and it's going to, a lot of tears will be shed, but I think a lot of inspiration will come from this too. Just from hearing you, it's giving me a lot of, inspiration as we speak on how I can also be involved and how we can help one another. So,
Yeah.
yeah, awesome. How
Yeah.
can people
Wonderful.
connect with you? I know you gave us your website, but if people wanted to consult with you, do they just go on the website and then book a call there, or?
Uh, yeah, the easiest way is that. The easiest way
Okay.
is that. And there's an info at, email address, and that's the best. We're watching it. I have a team. We're watching it constantly. We will get back to everybody, and we are set up in a way that allows us to stack our resources in terms of architectural production. So
Okay.
we work with some great partners, and we're all very concerned about cost. Um, you know, our rates are not changing. We're not
No,
we're not
if
saying, oh,
anything,
okay, well,
it
it's a
might
good time to
go
raise
up.
our rates.
Yeah,
We're not
yeah.
doing that. Yeah,
Okay, that's really good. That's really good to know. I really value that, and I think other people are probably going to do the opposite, right? So it's very important that
yeah.
people vet who they're going to work with now more than ever. Do you have a like GoFundMe account or something that you'd like to share? Maybe a family's
Oh,
GoFundMe? Because I'm being mindful of that too, but I know, some GoFundMe accounts, it's kind of hard to rely on which ones are true or not. So if there's any that you want to throw out there, feel free. If not, no worries.
we don't right now. Um,
Okay.
I will tell you, I just got an email from a fellow who had a really, really great art gallery in our village, and of course, all these paintings, sculpture, his whole business was burnt. So he's got to go fund me, and I think that's great. Let's also consider. Let's not forget to support the arts because that's the human side of who we are. Like
Right,
let's keep
right.
that going if we can. But I've been I've been told, and I think this is still true, to be very careful about setting
Yes,
up a GoFundMe until you have your insurance claims settled. Because
exactly.
our fear is that the insurance companies or FEMA
And FEMA,
will look at that and
right,
say, "Oh, if you've got a GoFundMe and you've got another source of money coming in, you need to
right,
claim that." And so
right.
just work through what's available to you in terms of the sources that are already out there. So we're not doing a
I did
GoFundMe
see that.
until, yeah.
Yeah, I did see that, and I even saw like you even had to be very careful with the wording and how you're asking for funds. I haven't really shared any because again, I'd want to be
Yeah.
mindful of that, and I don't even know if these funds are going to the right people. Like there's so many accounts right now;
Yes.
it's hard, to know what's true and what's not. But yeah, no, I think this is super helpful. I really want to thank you, Drew. And if there's any other way that I can help you, thank you for being on my podcast. I'd be more than happy to help you and your clients in any way, shape, or form, whether it's ROI analysis, build out analysis or proposal. You just let me know.
Steph, thank you so much. That is a really wonderful offer, and we will be talking with each other after this a lot.
Yes.
And I really appreciate this time. As we said at the beginning, our intention for today originally was not to talk about a fire rebuild, but
Right.
this is what's happened. This is the current
It's what's
reality,
happening right
and
now. Yeah.
yeah, and so thank you very, very much. Thank you deeply for continuing on with this podcast today, letting me have a chance to talk about the process that we're going through and the process that other people can go through to
I think that's
to get
amazing.
back, to get into something. It's not going back, right? We're going forward, and we're going to go forward in the best way we
And build
all
better.
can. Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
So
Thank
yeah.
you so much.
Thank you so much for your time together. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you again, Drew. And thank you to our listeners. Please make sure you guys follow Drew and reach out to him. If you've been impacted by the LA fires, make sure you have at least a conversation with him and explore all your options. I know that right now it may be a very emotional roller coaster, but just be mindful, be aware, and take your time. You don't have to make a decision right away either. Like, you can take your time, just figure out housing for the next year, and then take your time with everything else. Thank you once again. We'll see you on the next one.